back to the Body, Mind, and Soul podcast series. Today, we're going to venture into the brain and a key part of it called the cerebrum. The cerebrum is an important part of the brain as it governs key functions which are vital for our body. Let's elaborate more on this right here, right now, on Body, Mind, and Soul. So the cerebrum, also known as the tencephalon, takes up to around 75% of the brain and is at the front going all the way to the back. It is connected by nerve fibers called the corpus callosum, and the cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres because of the corpus callosum, the left and the right hemispheres. The outer layer of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex, and the cerebrum includes the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are key parts of the brain but are unique enough to be considered separate. But we'll talk more about the cerebral cortex, hippocampus, and amygdala in a later podcast. So the cerebrum is further divided into four major lobes, which we will discuss later on in the video. Since the cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, many things which happen in a certain side of the body has the opposite side hemisphere responsible for that action or responsible for controlling that action. Now let's talk about the four major lobes of the cerebrum. So the frontal lobe is the largest of the four major lobes and is located at the direct front of the brain. The frontal lobe governs cognitive skills, which include but are not limited to logic, reasoning, attention, and etc. It also takes over control over behavior, like knowing when to release serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, or when to release or when to not release norepinephrine, which is another neurotransmitter, and etc. Another function which the frontal lobe performs are motor functions. These are our regular walking, moving, and more. And another key function is personality. A famous incident about the cerebrum and the frontal lobe was actually the 1848 case study, Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage was a railroad worker who was said to have a very happy, easygoing personality. But an accident happened and an iron tamping rod or iron tamping pole went straight through his head into his left frontal lobe. This caused a massive alteration in his personality that a calm, happy person became a vulgar, aggressive person. That shows how damage to the frontal lobe matters a lot when taking personality into account. Well, let's cut with the frontal lobe and move on to the parietal lobe. So, the parietal lobe is located at the top of the brain. It handles sensory processing, which includes temperature, touch, pressure, and pain. The lobe also governs spatial awareness and perception, which includes how deep an object is and stuff like that. Another important function of this lobe includes integration of sensory information. The integration of sensory information, just like I said, the sensory processing. The information is at which temperature does our body get burnt, like knowing when to take your hand off or knowing when to keep your hand on something. And a very, very, very important function of this lobe includes numerical and mathematical reasoning. So this means the parietal lobe takes control of the functions like calculations, which are so important to us and are used in our everyday lives. Well, now let's talk a bit about the temporal and occipital lobes. So the temporal lobe is the lobe which is located at the sides of our brains. It is really related to hearing. This is because it helps us understand language, especially when someone else is speaking. This function is called auditory processing. Another important function is memory formation and retrieval. The temporal lobe creates new memories, whether they are long-term or short-term. But the lobe can also help you try and find old memories which are important to you. For example, if you're trying to remember where you last kept your car keys or your watch or something, you can use the temporal lobe to try and remember that. The temporal lobe also helps understand emotions, which is something that auditory processing can't do alone. The temporal lobe is believed to have a small part in visual perception. This small part of visual perception is facial recognition. This is kind of like the Face ID feature in the newer phones. Now let's move on to the occipital lobe. This is a unique lobe. The occipital lobe is at the back of the brain. It's mainly responsible for visual perception. This includes color, which is an incredibly complex topic, which we will discuss a bit later in the video, later in the podcast, and even in a later podcast itself. Also, perceiving whether or not someone or something is moving is a very, very, very important function, as it sometimes saves us in life or death situations. It also governs spatial awareness and depth perception, which we already talked about in the parietal lobe. It also governs the contractions and relaxations of our eye muscles, which is basically controlling eye movement. Now, let's talk about some of the unique parts of the cerebrum. Now, a quick quote-unquote case study is the quote-unquote the dress. It is a 2015 internet war on whether the color of this certain dress was white and gold or blue and black. Even though in some pictures it looked like it was white and gold, it was actually blue and black. It looked white and gold to some people because of the major differences in human color perception. But when the dress was in shadows, the dress looked white and gold because shadows overrepresent blue. So let's move on to nurturing and nutrition for our cerebrum. So nurturing our cerebrum is very important in order to keep our important functions intact. Some ways you can nurture your cerebrum is by challenging your brain and stimulating it. This includes puzzles, games, and etc. Another method of nurture includes getting a good night's sleep. A full 8 hours can leave you to wake up feeling energized and refreshed. Another way to keep your cerebrum intact is by having good social connections. Not in like a connection kind of way, but more in the, getting to talk to people, having relationships. Because making meaningful relationships can really help your cerebrum stay nurtured. Last but not least is, of course, a healthy diet. A healthy diet really helps you build those neural connections in the brain and really helps keep your cerebrum healthy. Antioxidants, grains, iron, and omega-3 fatty acids all help to nurture your brain. So today we learned that the cerebrum is a very, very, very important part of our brain, as it governs functions like sensory perception, auditory processing, and visual perception. The cerebrum is also very important with personality, as we discussed about the 1848 case study, Mr. Phineas Gage. We also talked about nutrition for our cerebrum, which includes sleep all the way to a healthy diet. Thank you so much for watching, and please stay tuned for next time as we go in depth about neurotransmitters. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below, as it would really help this podcast, and it would help me make a promise to you guys that I will improve my content as much as I can. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.